Welcome to the Western Baul podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled Bittersweet, a Refuge in Troubled Times. The talk was given by Mary Angelon Young on May 10th, 2025 via Zoom. Angelon is a workshop leader with a background in Jungian psychology, an editor and author of As It Is, Under the Punnai Tree, The Baul Tradition, Caught in the Beloved's Petticoats, Enlightened Duality with Lee Lozowick, The Art of Contemplation, and other books. In this talk, she speaks about the bittersweet transformational quality of having a wound that only God, or the divine or the absolute, can heal. Angelon says that a personal wound can be a doorway into an objective broken heart, which encompasses the suffering of the world, and that a hallelujah can arise in being with this. In considering the topic, she refers to writings and teachings of James Hillman, Richard Rohr, C.G. Young, Arnaud Desjardins, and her own teacher, Lee Lozowick. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Mary Angelon Young.
I'm very happy to be here tonight. I'm going to talk for a while. I'm going to read some things that inspire me and I think will be inspiring for you. And then we'll have some opportunities for sharing and digging in together in conversation on this subject of the bittersweetness of life and bittersweet in general. It's a subject that's very precious to me. It's such a powerful consideration. And for me, it's really connected to a teaching that my teacher, Lee Lozowick, gave many times during his life. He gave for the first time in 1988 in India. And that teaching is very simple. It's one line. It's, you need to have a broken heart that only God can heal. And he's speaking about the necessity that we have on the path of transformation. And once our life is consciously dedicated to transformation, that having a broken heart that only God can heal is a necessity. And so we're going to circumambulate these two things tonight from different perspectives. I have found this teaching, to have a broken heart that only God can heal, to be a lifetime process for me, and that it's worked on a daily basis. And there's a connecting link there between my very human self and my human brokenheartedness about many things for lots of reasons, and the divinity, that connection, the link between, okay, we have a broken heart, only God can heal it. I'm using the word God as Lee did in a very, very universal sense. So for you, that may be the ultimate reality. That may be the supreme reality. You may be imagining your God image is masculine or feminine or beyond gender. None of that matters. So we're speaking in symbolic language, of course. So just go with it, with what's true for you in your relationship with the divinity, with the divine intelligence that's created all of this incredible mystery that we're in. So things have always been chaotic. Life is all about change. We're constantly in a state of change. Everything is changing all the time. Birth and death and birth and death and birth and death. And some growth and development in between birth and death, some sustaining and maintaining of life in between the big transition times, the big threshold times. So this is what we have. And that in and of itself, the momentum and the reality of that impermanence and the fact that we will experience loss again and again and again in an inexorable way, that alone is enough to give us a wound that can only be healed through the transcendent, or the divine that is also immanent and transcendent. But we live in a time of even greater change and even greater uncertainty and greater chaos and unreality, what's real, what's not real. This labyrinth that we have to navigate in the times that we're in, and the challenges of that are really extreme. And the heartbreak around what's happening in the world and the suffering that's going on in the world. And of course, there's always been suffering. There's always been terrible suffering. The Middle Ages, war, slavery, genocide. This goes on and on and on. But there's a particular flavor of the bittersweet of life right now. Many people are bearing witness to this. The heartbreak is so great. The grief is so great. And our grief that we feel is equal to the love that we feel. There's something very precious and mysterious and possible that we don't even know what it is at this time on this planet. I live at Triveni Ashram in the high desert in central Arizona. And there's a pinyon pine tree right outside my house. There's several of them. I have a love affair going with these trees. They're very important to me. So one of them is dying right now. And nothing that we have done can fix that, like extra water, fertilizer, praying, talking to it. It's just, it's time. And it's a fairly young tree. It's not an old tree that's lived its life out that you're like, yes, okay, it's time to go back to the earth. It's not like that. It's a younger tree. It's about 12 feet high. And so it's there every day for me as a very potent symbol that impermanence is the name of the game. And it's a bittersweet. It's a simple thing. I can talk about that tree pretty easily, whereas it's much more difficult for me to talk about the heartbreak that I have about what's going on the planet and what's going on for human beings, what's going on in the oceans, and what's happening with the mother. And by the way, tomorrow is Mother's Day. So let's remember the mother tonight also. So I like to quote this Nigerian man, Bayo Okomolafe. He's trained in clinical psychology. He's a doctor of psychology, lectures all around the world. At some point, he went back to Nigeria to gain wisdom from the elders, from the Nigerian elders there. One of the things that he is very fond of saying that I love is he says, times are urgent. We need to slow down. And it's a wonderful juxtaposition for me because times are urgent. And the mode that we're all trained in the dominant culture on the planet now is like, go out there and do something or work harder or go faster. But he's saying that the deep wisdom is we need to slow down. And the way I understand that is we need to slow down so that we can go within. Because if it's true that we need to have a broken heart that only God can heal, and that that's the doorway to transformation and to infinite possibilities, then we're only going to discover that. We're only going to find out what that is for ourselves, for this person, this individual. We're only going to get the revelations of that if we slow down and go within. It doesn't mean that we're not still working or doing things or handling all of the responsibilities that we have and grappling with the 10,000 things. It means that inside we need to slow down so that we can go within and drink from a deeper well. To quote someone else whose work I love, David White, the poet, drink from a deeper well. And we have to keep remembering this every day. In fact, way more than every day. It's like moment by moment, because we will forget and we will get distracted and we will have 1,000 demands on us. Or we may just get distracted by our personal wounds. So before I go a little further into that, personal wounds, I want to read something to you. This is a book. It's called Bittersweet. It's by Susan Cain. She's posing the question. This is near the end of the book. What should we do with the eternal elusiveness of our most precious dreams and our deepest longings? Those things that are connected to our broken heart. What should we do with the eternal elusiveness? And then she begins to talk about the Kabbalah, which is the mystical branch of Judaism. This Kabbalah, some of you may be familiar with it. It's something that I have a great love of also. The Kabbalah inspired Leonard Cohen's great song, Hallelujah. And so she's writing about that. This is Susan Cain, quote, "That is, in the beginning, all of creation was a vessel filled with divine light, that it broke apart, and now the shards of holiness are strewn all around us. Sometimes it's too dark to see them. Sometimes we're too distracted by pain or conflict. But our task is simple, to bend down, dig them out, pick them up, and in so doing, to perceive that light can emerge from darkness. Death gives way to rebirth. The soul descends to this riven world for the sake of learning how to ascend, and to realize that we all notice different shards of light. I might see a lump of coal, but you might spot the gold glimmering beneath. Note the modesty of this vision," she continues. "Note that it doesn't promise utopia. On the contrary, it teaches the impossibility of utopias, and by implication that we should cherish what we have. We shouldn't cast it aside in favor of an unobtainable perfection. But we can bring the bittersweet tradition to our respective domains, to the corners of the world over which we have some small influence." Just the very word bittersweet has this beautiful in-between quality because it's not bitter, it's not sweet, it's both. It's a both and. We're experiencing many different deep feelings at the same time. This is the quality of life, and this is the quality of the possibility that we could have an awakened heart in the midst of whatever is going on for us, including our failures, the so-called failures. It's not about being perfect. It's about bringing our caring to the world. David White, he's very fond of saying this, we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to bring our perfection to the world. Maybe we just want to let the hero's journey, just set it down and turn toward a different kind of journey, a journey toward wholeness, a journey that's definitely going to take us into all kinds of challenges. It's going to take us deep into the underworld. In fact, the mythical underworld, the underworld of so many different mythic stories and traditions. It will take us into that. We were talking the other night briefly about aging, and it has become very clear to me in my own aging process that you don't necessarily become an elder, a wise elder, just because you're getting older. This is something that we work for, that we craft, we forge. We have to keep awakening ourselves to deeper and deeper dimensions of our humanity. And we get wisdom. Wisdom is a very human quality. It's not about being perfect. It's not about transcendence and ascending and going up and getting out of here. It's about being present to what's happening here, what's happening for our human species, what's happening for all the other species on the planet, being present to that, bearing witness to it. This is all about caring. And so often we say, I've heard myself say this, oh, I don't care. I don't care. But actually, I do care, and I care very, very deeply. I care passionately. And when I'm saying I don't care, I almost right away know that I'm just defending myself from having to feel the frustration, the pain, the heartbreak about a situation that I feel powerless in, that I can't do anything about except maybe pray or bring my presence to it, bring who I am, bear witness, be willing to be in life. So this thing of caring is really important if we want to begin to work with bittersweet, the bittersweetness of life in a way that it actually becomes an alchemical agent for us. It's becoming an alchemical agent in our lives. We have to be willing to care. And so not caring, that's a defense mechanism. Another defense mechanism that I'm very familiar with is my cynicism. It's going to be on the C's for a while now. The C, words start with a C. Caring, cynicism. Cynicism definitely says I don't care. I love the writings of James Hellman, who died some years back. He's a depth psychologist, and he was the director of studies, I think, at the Jungian Institute in Zurich for 10 years. He talks about cynicism as being something that we really actually inflict on ourselves, that we become hardened to our own sweetness and softness in our cynicism. So it's something to really watch out for. And of course, cynicism helped me a lot. It certainly did help me, I think, when I was much younger, when I was in my 20s. But does it help me now in my 70s? No, when I first tuned into this thing about we need to bring our caring to the world and to our experience of our humanity, I looked up the word care. What are the roots of the word care? And of course, sure enough, it's from the Latin cura, and it's connected to grief. So lots of times when we're saying, I don't care, we're saying, I refuse to grieve. For many people on the spiritual path, and especially in some of the more non-dual traditions, grieving, it's like a bad thing. Maybe bad is not a fair word, but let's say it's considered counterproductive to inner practice. But I disagree with this. So I'm speaking for me and my experience on the path and my own sadhana. Grief has been a very essential spiritual enzyme. I like to call it that, a spiritual enzyme. So important to me. It has helped me so much. And it has been a true path to walk at times. It has forced me to go within and drink from a deeper well and to really experience firsthand the broken heart that only the divine can heal. So care comes from cura, the Latin, meaning concern, trouble, or grief. This is bittersweet because we also love it. If we care about something, our hearts are involved. I'm going to come back to caring in a few minutes, but I want to go to something from my teacher, Lee. As I was saying, Lee gave this teaching on the path you must have a broken heart that only God can heal in 1988 in India. And in 2001, in early September, we were in France with Lee at his ashram in France, and someone who was there for the evening for a conversation amongst whoever was there asked him the question. The question was, you talk about the broken heart a lot. What do you mean? This was, late summer in France. It was absolutely beautiful. Flowers were blooming outside. It was just before autumn would come. It was really a beautiful moment. We're sitting in this old rambling 300-year-old stone house, maison. Lee answered, quote, there is a difference between the broken heart and ordinary angst. We can very easily be depressed and brought down by the suffering in the world. The broken heart that I speak of is a heart of peace and understanding in relationship to the divine. I call it the broken heart because it encompasses the suffering in the world. But the relationship to that suffering is one of inspiration. We are naturally turned toward doing whatever we can to relieve that suffering. We may still feel overwhelmed by the suffering in the world, but it doesn't incapacitate us. So just a few days later, 9/11 happened in New York City, and thousands of people died, and the shock waves reverberated around the world. And Lee called everyone together and told everyone what had happened in the States. And he relayed the information, and he said, now is the time to pray. And so that is, in fact, what we did. We prayed. In my experience, is that's one of the ways that the broken heart schools us. It educates us. It teaches us how to pray. It teaches us how to be humble. Humble, I'm not talking about shame and self-hatred. I'm talking about actual humility in the face of the mystery of creation. So the broken heart can teach us something about praying.
What I heard when you were reading that quote was that the broken heart encompasses the suffering of the world, but the relationship to that is inspiration. What is that inspiration about? I think a little bit later in the quote, you said that it had to do with the relief of others' suffering. Am I understanding that correctly? That one can be inspired by a broken heart, feeling some movement to relieve that in others. Is that what you were saying?
Well, I'll read the quote again, and then I am going to talk about that some more, and I'm going to bring in some other contemporary teachers on this subject. So I'll read the quote again from Lee. This is from 2001. There's a difference between the broken heart and ordinary angst. We can very easily be depressed and brought down by the suffering in the world. The broken heart that I speak of is a heart of peace and understanding in relationship to the divine. I call it the broken heart because it encompasses the suffering of the world. But the relationship to that suffering is one of inspiration. We are naturally turned toward doing whatever we can to relieve the suffering. We may still feel overwhelmed by the suffering in the world, but it doesn't incapacitate us. So when he's speaking of a heart of peace and understanding and relationship to the divine, one of the things that brings forward for me is a deep trust in the nature of life. Peace and understanding in relationship to the divine. Well, I mean, we can't understand the divine, but we can trust. Maybe we can't fully surrender ourselves. It's said certainly in the Hindu tradition, you cannot surrender yourself. It's grace that surrenders you. That's one way to look at it. But we can cultivate trust, and we might need to start with recognizing that we don't trust. We might have to grapple with that, and that's part of the process. Doubt and faith are two sides of the same coin, in the sense that I'm talking about cultivating trust or grappling with the places where I don't trust, where I have fear, where I have anxiety. So trust is one of the things that comes up for me there. And then the next thing that Lee says is it encompasses the suffering in the world, but the relationship to that suffering is one of inspiration. So I'd like to offer another teaching. I so love the work of Father Richard Rohr. He's a Catholic friar. He's written many, many books on the universal Christ, and he's really revisioned and brought forward this mystical stream of Christianity that I find very, very nourishing and helpful. So I was listening to an interview with him recently. He's being interviewed by Tammy Simon on Insights at the Edge, talking about his new book. One of my takeaways from listening to him speak, and he is a wise elder, he's 82, he's older than me, probably older than most of us, I can't tell for sure, because this is Zoom after all. He's someone who really qualifies as a wise elder in my book. So he's talking about the anger and outrage that we have, which of course can lead to cynicism because it just hurts so much. We just have to say, I don't care anymore. I can't do anything. So he's talking about the importance of staying present to our outrage and our anger, to be with it, not shove it down or ignore it or deny it. Okay, I am really angry. I feel outrage at what is going on, and staying with it until we can get underneath it to the sadness that is there. And those of us who've done much work at all with our feeling states through meditation or through contemplative work of any kind or psychotherapy, different kinds of healing modalities, we come to know that maybe even always, I'm not going to say always because that's kind of a trigger word, isn't it? Because there's always an exception to always. But most of the time, there's sadness underneath our anger. We are sad. There's sadness. There's a sense of loss. There's a feeling of helplessness. There's grief. There's worry. There's sadness underneath all of those things. We're sad. I feel sorrow. This is sorrow. And he says that if we stay with that a third thing comes into play. And one of my great mentors, C.G. Jung, he says the third thing is the transcendent function. Whenever you're in a pair of opposites, the third thing is that for some reason, we don't even know why, it's out of our control, a hallelujah arises. And it's paradoxical. There's no reason for the hallelujah because there's still anger and outrage. There's still sadness. We're sad. But in the depths of our sorrow and our sadness, out of the darkness, there comes a light. And it's all of one fabric. It's bittersweet. And it's real. It's so real. And that little moment of hallelujah, that inexplicable uprising of praise. So for me, this is what the inspiration is about. This is how I understand Lee's statement that our relationship to the suffering is one of inspiration. But we have to work the ground of that. Like all very good teachings, lots of them, they can help us, but it's a concept. And it will eventually just become another prison, nicer prison. It's a better prison. So we have to live it. Like Charlie Parker says, if you don't live it, it won't come out your horn. The inspiration won't be there in the music. So because we're willing to move through our anger and outrage, whatever all those states involve, they may be very complicated and many different threads of different types of emotional states, move through that to real sadness and caring. Because if we're in sadness, we know that we care. We care so much. Love is the element. Love is the sweetness in the bittersweet now. We care so much that we cherish. And when we begin to cherish life, then there's a hallelujah. Now, I heard this thing also this week from the ecologist Paul Hawken. He was talking about how one grass seed, like rye, one grass seed, it sprouts and it has 14 million roots for one seed, 14 million roots. This is what the science is showing us about life. We could be talking about astrophysics and we'd be hearing also incredible things that science is uncovering in these extraordinary times that we're living through. So one grain of rye, one grass seed has 14 million roots. Those 14 million roots are in reciprocal relationship in communication with the mycelium. Somehow this communication happens where the 14 million roots say to the mycelium, I need nitrogen and phosphorus. The mycelium says, okay, I'm going to get you some nitrogen and some phosphorus, and I need some glucose and some sugar and some chlorophyll from you. Right? And so they have this exchange that happens. I mean, it's unbelievable miracle. Really, since it's Mother's Day tomorrow, and I'm loving my mother, the great mother, the earth mother in this moment, I'm cherishing her. I hear that and I'm just taken to something like awe. And I will come back to that again too. We need to keep reimagining and revisioning our relationship to the divine that is transcendent and immanent, that's both embodied in this world and also transcendent into way beyond and further beyond. I wanted to spend just a moment on working through our personal wounds to get to the great wound of the broken heart, because it's very easy for us to try to bypass that and to spend decades bypassing it, in fact. And maybe we get to our 60s or our 70s or even later, and we realize that actually I do need to attend to my inner child or whatever it is. I need to do some work, some integrative healing work toward greater wholeness because this is a part of me. So this person that I'm going to quote now, Arnaud Desjardins, he was a spiritual friend to me, a really wonderful spiritual friend. He helped me a lot. He was a very close friend of my teacher, Lee. And he's speaking about the wound of the heart. And someone has asked him a question and said, I sabotage myself all the time because I'm so rebellious. And of course, we know that something like this in our character, it's coming from the experiences that we had growing up and the decisions that we made very early on in our lives, whatever it might be. But in this case, this person is talking about the rebelliousness, which I can personally relate to, having been a rebel a lot all my life. So being rebellious, this person is finding that he is sabotaging himself. And he says, what can I do about it? Arnaud says, yes, so you are a rebellious one. Your rebellion is your enemy, and you want to win. But it is said, love your enemies. These are the enemies, something that we want to destroy in ourselves because it's causing us pain and problems. We want to get rid of it. We want to smash it. We want to shut it up. We want it to go away. And then Arnaud says, I'm not joking. He says, love your enemy. It is a completely new approach. And he's talking about how as long as we are so divided within ourselves, we're literally at war within ourselves. We can't get to the place that we want to get to in our spiritual practice or in our journey through life. We can't get there because there's something really fundamental that needs to happen for us that has to do with love thyself. Not indulge your ego and go around causing suffering to other people and acting out. That's not what he's talking about. He's really taking this teaching of Jesus. He says, of course, it's a spiritual teaching. Don't hate yourself. It's very important. Not so easy to listen to, not so easy to understand, but so fundamental. The key word will always, in every respect, be love. You are dissatisfied with yourself because you are too whatever, too rebellious, too prideful, too lost, too selfish, too something, whatever it is. And because of that, you don't love yourself. Because of that, you are divided within. So Arnaud says, love all sides of yourself. Only then can you change. He says, we are all very strange people. We go to such and such Mahatma or guru or saint or teacher expecting love from him or her. What is a saint or a sage but one who is established in universal love? Do you agree? And I find it normal and natural that the sage loves me as I am. This is the beauty of the sage. We feel loved immediately the moment we meet the sage. Not the sage will love me when I am nice, but the sage loves me as I am. The sage loves as the sun shines. So what is important is that you give yourself love and understanding. Whatever may be your weaknesses, your defects, it is not to be weak or indulge in our weaknesses. Not at all. Accept ourselves as we are completely. If your heart is wounded in one way or another, your intellect can try to understand this. So you begin there. You begin by becoming intellectually convinced, like, I'm willing to try this. This sounds right. It rings true. That's the first step, Arnaud says. Don't try to put anything into practice if you are not first convinced of it. And that begins with your intellect, with your mind. Yes, love your enemies. It means love all sides of yourself. It's not a question of fighting to win. It's a question of curing a wounded heart. A rebellious child is not a happy child. Don't be hard with yourself. You may be strong with yourself, but don't be hard with yourself. You can fight and fight and fight for years. You will see that you are not successful in that way. There is another way. Love yourself. So I think that's really profound help for just beginning to work with our personal wounds, because those are a way into this objective wound of the broken heart that only God can heal, only the divine can heal. So we may need to do some of that kind of work. We probably do, even on a day-to-day basis, because we're multi-layered, complex beings. We have all this humanity, and then we've got very, very deep, deep, deep levels of ourselves. And we go very deep and we go very high. There's lots of parts of us, lots of levels. So I want to talk for a few minutes about awe as the source of inspiration. Because while we're doing this, we may have to spend some time down in the mud for the lotus to actually be able to blossom as we know it does. We know this image, we know this symbol, right? The lotus, one of the most beautiful flowers in the world, blooms out of mud. It comes up out of the mud and muck at the bottom of the pond. So we're working on all those different levels. And so on some of those levels, we can position ourselves in a way in life through our relationship with beauty, through our reciprocal relationships with other human beings, with other species, with nature, with the sunrise and the sunset, with music. So many different doorways where we can stand in the doorway and we can cultivate a relationship with awe and wonder. Sometimes when we've gotten really out of balance, when we've become very unbalanced in our neurosis or our psychological wounds, our woundedness, the shadow side of that, which operates autonomously when we're not paying attention to it, keeping an eye on it, and knowing what it is. When we get really out of balance and out of sorts, it's because we need to revitalize our connection with the divine that is both transcendent and immanent. You know, this thing about being on the path of transformation is that to have a relationship with the inner other, the divine within, it demands a lot from us. It's very demanding, and it won't leave us alone once we've made a commitment. And of course, we might need to keep reaffirming that commitment. And Teacher Lee once said to me, I've never forgotten this. He said, whenever you have a clear moment, that's when you reaffirm your intention to the universe. Another word for God, universe. You reaffirm, you state your intention. However that is for you. Maybe you say, I am here to serve all beings. May all beings be happy, healthy, and prosper. Perhaps you've taken a bodhisattva vow, a vow to relieve the suffering of all beings. However that is for you, I am here. Just saying, I am here. Let me serve. I wish to serve. There's so many different ways. Of course, it's a prayer. It's a prayer when we do this, when we have a clear moment and we state our intention to the universe, we speak to the beloved, another word for God. We speak to the beloved as if she or he is right inside here, inside us. As it said, the beloved, the divine is closer than your breath, closer than your breath. It's very, very intimate. So this is something that we can do. Even if we have a clear moment, we're having clarity, but we're not feeling like the waves of love. We're not being washed upon the shores of love at the moment. Things still look pretty bleak. We can still cultivate that reciprocal relationship. And this is how we court wonder and awe. Here's a great quote, and I'm not sure who said this. It comes from one of the Jungian writers, that we need to continually revitalize our connection with the transcendent so that we can get up and walk to our fate instead of being dragged there by neurosis. I like that. That really has some bittersweetness in it, doesn't it? So we can get up and walk to our fate instead of being dragged there by our neurosis. So when we've lost touch with that inspiration, we're not feeling inspired, how do we reconnect? Sometimes we have to reimagine the transcendent, the immanent transcendent divinity. Maybe our old ideas and concepts about that are no longer working for us. Because it's true, as Jung said, that what was absolutely wonderful for us in the morning of our lives, in the afternoon of our lives will not be. We have to keep revisioning and reimagining and allowing that to recreate within us, because that's the way of life, right? That's the way of life. Everything is in change and flow. They called this the great process of divine evolution. Everything is in change and flow. And so there is the bittersweetness of it. It won't be the same anymore in some way. There's a thread of continuity, of course, in our relationship with the divine. But maybe we need to do some of that work of reimagining, what is my image of God now? Or the ultimate reality, or there's no image, or what is that? What's that about for me? Jung says, once a religious image is concretized, it is dead. So we have to keep reimagining and remythologizing. It has to be alive, living, fluid, moving. So it's revelatory.
I've been thinking about this for a while. We have all these wars and suffering, hunger and everything. And Gurdjieff was saying that practice isn't for the masses. Very few people get it. Very few people practice it. I was just wondering if the way things are going is the way things are because the masses, they're not working on self. All of happiness comes from the outside, and that's all they know. I used to be like that till things happened in my life, and I could see the happiness comes from within on planet Earth. Maybe it is a place for us to develop our soul. Maybe that's what we're here. And when things get too chaotic, things end up the way they end up, and it's a restart for everything. Is that the way it's supposed to be? Is that the cycle of life? Is this supposed to be the way it is? And the suffering is there for us to have compassion, opportunity, you could say.
We can't answer all those questions. I think it's great to ponder them because they're also doorways into wonder and awe. I mean, these mysteries are awesome. And they're wonderful doorways into cultivating some awe and wonder at it all. For me, it's about living with reality of what is. And so going back to Richard Rohr, who I was sharing this thing about the unexpected hallelujah arises, kind of like the phoenix rising out of the ashes when we're feeling the wars and the suffering and all of it. Richard Rohr's, actually the title of his book, it has the phrase gratuitous goodness in the title. And he's talking about freely giving goodness to the world, even though things are not as they should be. Like in the gospel song, there's a beautiful gospel song. Even though things are not as they should be, God is so good to me. So offering gratuitous goodness to the world and bearing witness to what is, even though we cannot answer any of these questions, we can wonder at them. We can be inspired by them, in fact, the questions. And often I find answers to not be where it's at anyway. It's the question that's so valuable. The burning of the question is so valuable to keep living into that. So this possibility that we can offer our gifts to the world. The most basic gift just being the goodwill, the gratuitous, the freely given goodness of our hearts. Just to give that to the world. Very simple, very modest, very precious and rare. You were bringing up so few people are doing the kind of inner work that we're considering here tonight, or that Gurdjieff talks about, or that the traditions talk about. I look at it this way. If I'm even a little bit awake, if my heart is even a little awakened, then I have a responsibility to keep going for everybody and all created beings. Because the gift of life is so precious. And to have any awakened capacity to reflect back on the Creator in love is so precious. So with the freedom to give goodness to the world, or the freedom that comes from being able to see more about the mystery of life, with freedom comes a lot of responsibility. Because we're not separate from anybody. We are not separate. We are all one. And we know this. At least we know it intellectually, or we've heard it and we think it's true. Right? Maybe we've actually had a non-dual moment where it was real for us, and we actually had the taste, the flavor, the rasa of that oneness. We had an experience of the unified existence of all of life. Maybe we haven't had an experience like that, but that really rings true for me. It's said in some of the traditions that God has one eye open and one eye closed. God is creation and destruction. God is the three forces. The divine is the universe is being birthed, it's being sustained, and it's growing and developing, and then it's dying, it's being destroyed again. So this is a fearsome thing. Or the goddess. We really see these qualities when we sing praises to the Hindu goddesses, especially like Durga and Kali. Death is a powerful teacher. So reimagining God, we can understand that God is the three forces: creation, preservation, destruction, the three gunas of Hinduism. In the Celtic tradition, it's called the Trishkal, or the Trishkalian, the three forces. They're carved all over those 5,000-year-old standing stones in Scotland and England and Britannia and France. That's quite something. These ancient indigenous cultures, ancient cultures understood this. So even though all of that is true, we were born to die. This is a simple little thing from C.G. Jung. When you feel lost, just do the next right thing. Just do the next right thing. Wash the dishes, sweep the floor, answer that email, take your friend to the doctor, go to work, whatever it is. Tell your partner that you're sorry that you were so out of sorts and unpleasant, or your friend. Next right thing. So these can all be very simple ways that we practice gratuitous goodness, freely given. We're not expecting anything back. We don't expect anybody to praise us because we did it, or that we've succeeded now, or that we're perfect now. None of that. Just giving it. It's the next right thing to do. And we do it for all beings. May all beings be happy. These are my thoughts about it. Another teaching from my teacher, Lee, that comes to mind as we're talking about this. I'm not going to go into it tonight, but the phrase itself is so powerful. The phrase is, the only grace is loving God. The practice of gratuitous goodness is a gesture of love. It's not easy. It sounds romantic almost. I hear myself saying it and I'm like, aren't we all just works in progress until our last breath? I want to read a quote from one of my writer heroes, He's long dead. His name is Tennessee Williams. Won every literary prize that you could win in this world. Brilliant genius. Decades ago, he said, "The world is violent and mercurial. It will have its way with you. We are saved only by love. Love for each other, and the love that we pour into the art we feel compelled to share. Being a parent, being a writer, being a painter, being a friend. We live in a perpetually burning building, and what we must save from it all the time is love."
Sometimes it's easier to feel that for other people than for myself, at least for certain parts of myself. Out of the things that you've said, one thing that is really striking me is Arnaud's comments about loving your enemies. And I remember when I was a kid hearing that teaching of Jesus and thinking of it being about other people exclusively, but to apply it to oneself. I can get that principle generally, of course. But when I find myself in a certain a certain part of myself, I realize that I forget that. And there's a childish part that still feels shame and that may not transform. It has occurred to me after all these years. So you were saying that when you feel lost, just do the right thing. That seems to really work, because sometimes I just get blindsided by a certain part of myself that seems like, oh, we've worked through this perhaps, but no. Things happened at a very deep level when we were children. And these days I'm thinking, well, maybe that's just not going to resolve, going to make my peace with that. One also said something like, don't be hard on yourself, but you can be strong. I feel sometimes right in the middle of this, internally, betwixt and between. And then I also feel that I can't be too preoccupied with this because there's so much work to do. There's the next thing to do.
I completely relate to what you're saying. And I've been saying that several times this week. Sometimes it's like, at my age, I'm going to be dragging this personality around until I die. This is what I have. So can I love it? And a lot of times I don't. I'm very hard on myself. And so that's one of the reasons I'm reading Arnaud's piece, because this is my work. How can I bring awareness and loving kindness to that, to my own self, so that I can practice goodness in the world? I mean, literally accepting myself and having compassion for everything that the child who was me went through, that formed the infrastructure of the whole personality and all of the complexes that we all have, lots of complexes, mother complex, father complex, goes on and on. We all have it. To work consciously with shame and with regret and with failure, and to know that I'm only human after all. But maybe that's the whole point of being here, is to experience both the transcendent and the human, to know it all, to not deny the human in favor of only the transcendent, but to be in that in-between that you were talking about, in the betwixt and between.
It seems like we desire the transcendent sometimes so we don't have to deal with the human. The human part is maybe the more difficult one.
Yeah, just get me out of this. I just want to go beyond the pain. I don't want to feel this pain. I'm not a practicing Christian, although I was raised in the Christian church, and I love the Christian tradition. But I have recently begun to have more of a feeling for this image that I don't like very much, which is Jesus on the cross, the vertical and the horizontal on the cross, nailed to the cross. And even Jesus has that moment. Why have you forsaken me? Even Jesus. This is a great teaching, great meaning, vast and huge and awesome teaching. So, yes, we are all works in progress. And as my friend Lama Palden, she's the Lama at Sukha City Tibetan Buddhist Center in San Rafael, California. She's been a practicing Buddhist for 55 years or something. She's so fond of saying, and says it so eloquently, like, you cannot have compassion, premium spiritual virtue and quality. You cannot have compassion for the other if you do not have compassion that begins here for self. So this is the thing. When I can love myself, even when I'm ashamed of myself, I've done something that I'm like, really? After all these years, after all this practice, right? The rest of you are probably all saints already. You don't have any of these struggles. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Then I notice my self-talk, what I'm saying to myself. And it's like, really? I said that when I was a few years old.
All right. So compassion for the totality of the being that we are, human and divine, stung and swollen, the poet says, Ellen Bass. So here's another quote from C.G. Jung. He says, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Do not be afraid. Tell God everything you fear to acknowledge, because he cannot heal what you conceal, and he will heal everything you reveal. And I ask you not to get hung up in the genders that he's using. He was writing this probably 90 years ago or something.
There's an echo in what you just shared from that quote from a Gnostic teaching attributed to Jesus. And it goes, what you do not bring forth from within you will destroy you. If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you.
Yes.
And I think there's a strong resonance with what Jung is saying there and what the Gnostic Jesus is attributed to saying there, which has always been with me. And another thing too about these parts of ourselves, there's another quote that I'm reminded of from the author Kahil Gibran. This was from a book that he wrote called Jesus, Son of Man. And I had to look for the quote here, but this is how it goes. And this is Mary Magdalene speaking. And I gazed at him, and my soul quivered within me, for he was beautiful. His body was single, and each part seemed to love every other part. And I think there's a teaching in there, especially with what Arnaud Desjardins was saying. We have these rebels within us as well as any enemy outside of us. But I think the real enemy could be within us. And if we learn to love that part and allow or be able to accept that part as well as have that part accept every other part of us, there's just something really potent about that.
Yeah, I love the Gospel of Thomas, his teachings.
After many years of practice, realization, study, I've come to a culminating statement, and that is, I'm unhappy. And that's just come to me this week. I think it's a mixture of my personal history and wound, objective sorrow as well. I don't think it's just me. And then that precise separation from God. So the task is to be able to, in any moment, tease these things apart, to understand more fully what's going on.
The Sufis have a really poetic way of talking about this inner work that we've been exploring tonight, which is that it's a path of ruin. But that's a whole other kind of doorway into it, this bittersweetness of ruin, because there's a treasure in the ruins. And it may be that a life that's really well lived is a treasure in a ruin.